As Americans, we say we don't negotiate with terrorists. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never really been part of that, but I've just heard it all of my life. The reason we don't negotiate with terrorists is because once you start negotiating, it's hard to find a way out of that, and there'll just be more terrorists. I really am not an expert on whether America negotiates with terrorists, but I will say this: Americans negotiate all the time. We negotiate with each other. Even more than that, we negotiate with ourselves. There's this little self-talk piece in life that we dig into when things are going on. We have this inward discussion, this narrative going on. And I'll give you one more since we're at church, that we often negotiate with God. We often try to talk God into what we want to talk God into, or talk God out of what we don't want. It happens. It doesn't always happen out loud. As a matter of fact, if it happens out loud, people look at you really weird, but I'm telling you, it happens. It happens with you. It happens with me. It happens with all God's little children. We're right in the middle of a series that's called Characters, and the reason it's called that is it's taken from the stories of people in the Bible. When I talk about stories, I'm not talking about like, come around, little children, I'll tell you a story. Not really talking about that. It's talking about life stories, people's life. Matter of fact, we use that phrase around here. We say that your story matters. It matters, and it needs to be told. It needs to be heard. It needs to be understood. It needs to be appreciated. Whatever your story is, and as you start looking through your story, you'll find there's parts that are exciting and there's parts you'd rather leave out. We believe stories matter. When we open up the library we call the Bible, we look at those. They're not just stories that have been made up. They are events that have happened, and when we look at them, we can learn from them. If there's a way we could learn from somebody else's mistakes, or if we could grab the principles that help somebody else so we don't have to fail our own way to success, well, then we all benefit. So we've been looking at those. The first week we looked at Jonathan. Last week we looked at a guy by the name of Peter. This week we're looking at the life of a guy named David. And I love this story of David. It's just one little episode in his life, but one of the things I love about it so much is that it is so detailed. It gives us what people were thinking and what people were saying and why they were doing it. I love all of those details. I'll tell you this, sometimes we negotiate with others and sometimes we negotiate with ourselves. Sometimes we negotiate with God. That's what we want to dig into today. I'll just give you a little hint toward the end of the message. I mean, if you fall asleep or fall off your chair and can't get back up or whatever you're doing as you're watching this, I'm just telling you this is where we're going to land. So this is, get ready for it. If you negotiate with God, you always lose. Now, that's not because God's such a good negotiator and he wins out in the argument. It's not that at all, because typically God doesn't even argue. He doesn't negotiate back. The problem is when you start to negotiate with God, usually you take him from his seat as God and you bring him to a much lower level. The reason you lose is once you start, you've already lost. I want to show you what that means in the life of David. Hopefully show you what it looks like in my life and your life. Why don't we dig into it together? This guy named David is a guy who you've probably heard a lot about. If this were Netflix, right at the beginning when it says you can click through the preview or ignore the wrap-up or the lead-in, that's when you would push that, but you can't do that with me, so you have to listen to the next minute and a half that I'm going to get you caught up with David. David's a guy, the first time we hear of him, God is looking for a new king, and he has allowed one because Israel negotiated with God and lost, and they ended up with a king. They wanted somebody who wore a robe and looked good. They were tired of having God as their king because he's invisible. All the other cool countries had a king. Why can't we? So they got Saul, and then God said, I have to choose the next one, and he went looking, and he kind of landed on this young man named David, which was a shock to his family, a shock to his parents, and quite frankly, a bit of a shock to David. Well, if you fast forward really quickly, the next we hear about David is he's doing these crazy things. He kills this mammoth human being, and he kind of takes this role of the future leader, and everybody loved him. People wrote songs about him. He was on everybody's social media feed. He was the it thing in his day. And then he kind of just fades back into obscurity. There's still people talking about him, but he's not very visible. And over the course of time, he is befriended by a young man named Jonathan, and he ends up, as the King Saul has noticed him, Saul likes him so much and he sees his potential. Matter of fact, Saul gave him one of his daughters to marry. So Saul becomes, as the king, he becomes David's father-in-law. There's an awkward one when you're kind of tapped on the shoulder to be the future king, but the current king is your father-in-law. That's awkward. Here's the reason, because you can't really be the king until he's not the king. Any way you look at it, that has some very difficult meals around the table. If you read the Bible through, you hear about some of those round the table discussions. Well, as David got more popular and more known, Saul became more jealous and more frustrated, and one of the reasons is because Saul decided, I don't want him to be a next king, even though I've heard rumors of that. I want my son Jonathan to be. And so eventually Saul decided, I'm going to kill David. When that happens, I don't know how you react when people want to kill you, but often that means you head out and you run. And David did that. He became a fugitive. And as he was out and about and people knew who he was, he attracted other people who, for whatever reason, were fugitives. And so when we land in 1 Samuel chapter 24, we find some things have begun to happen in David's life, and some things are happening in Saul's life. And what's happening in Saul's life is he has chosen about 3,000 well-qualified, like a tactical strike squad, to take with him to go find this guy David. And he's heard rumor that David is in this place called En-Gedi. Now, En-Gedi is this very kind of picturesque place in some ways. Part of it is it's just off the Dead Sea, which makes it picturesque. The other part is it's just kind of nothing. There's rocks and hills and a few little oases. It's filled with caves. That's the part you probably need to understand right now. If you go to BiblePlaces.com or whatever, you'll find a picture of it, because that's really a thing. BiblePlaces.com, if you like to see those kind of things. For us, what we find is we land in 1 Samuel 24, and when we do, here comes Saul, and he's looking for David, and he's got 3,000 men. Can you imagine 3,000 people? They're on camels and donkeys and mules or whatever they had in that day. And it's not just a little bit. They've got food and all the provisions they would need for not hours, but for days and weeks. They've got tents, and they've got all the stuff going along. So this is this huge caravan going through. And as he begins to dig in and look for David, something happens one day, and it happens to all of us one day, every day, hopefully, as long as you're sort of eating your fiber. He reaches a point where he says, I need to go to the bathroom. Now, if you're a normal person in his caravan, you just kind of find an exit ramp and go off and kind of do your thing. But if you're the king, it means everybody else stops. And when everybody else stops and they get out or get off of their animal, or they pull over to the side, and that's where we find our story begin today, is Saul goes into this cave. And when he does, everything begins to change. Look with me at 1 Samuel 24:3. It says, he came to the sheep pens along the way, and there was a cave there, and Saul went in, and here's this great statement, to relieve himself. Now, fun fact, or not, I think this is the only time in the Bible where it talks about someone going to the bathroom. Now, I assume they did. I think it's one of those things that's timeless. But this is the only time it really talks about it, and I'm okay with that, just to be honest with you. For those of you who love potty humor, this one is just built in. He goes in because he needs to relieve himself, and that's not the awkwardness, but that seems awkward. What is more awkward is what we find as we keep building in. What we realize is that David and his men were far back in the cave. So picture this. Well, don't picture this, because once you picture it, you'll never be able to get it out of your mind. But kind of imagine, sort of, in your mind, David and his men are back hiding, and they see the caravan going by. They go way back deep, and they're in a dark place. And you know what it's like in a dark place. Your eyes adjust eventually. So they can see out to where the light is, and they can see somebody coming in, and they can see who it is, and they have to be freaking out. This is the guy who's trying to come and murder me. This is the guy who's put a hit out on my life. Not just David, but probably the fugitives that are with him. And he is walking into the cave where we're hiding. But if you're Saul, you can't see anything. As you come in, all you can see is darkness. And so he walks in far enough to be out of sight of the rest of the caravan, I guess, I hope, and lays his robe down, and, well, it's the original squatty potty. It's like the moment. He's doing that thing he do. And as it's going on, There's all kinds of discussions. If you're David, you've got to be thinking, this is the moment I've been waiting for. This is how I'm going to become king. You've got to have this self-dialogue running that I can't believe this is happening. This is my chance. He's hunting me, and now the hunter becomes the hunted. Look at what's going on. I don't know for sure what David was thinking, but I do know exactly what the people around him were thinking, because listen to what it says in the next verse. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands and you'll deal with him as you wish." The guys were like, this is awesome. This is exactly, David, get him. This is God's opportunity. This is your open door. But let me just say this. A lot of us in church have been taught the way we make decisions in life, it has to do with open and closed doors. I don't know whoever started talking about that, but they should be beat around the head and shoulders, because nothing could be further from the truth. If you make your decisions in life based on open doors, there are many doors that are open that have nothing to do with God. They are not good decisions. Matter of fact, most open doors aren't ideal for you. Or if we say we make it on closed doors, if it's closed, it means God doesn't want us to. I just want to tell you this, most doors that are worth going through are closed. Most roads, for a pioneer, most of the road to pioneering something aren't paved. You have to fight your way through, work your way through. In life, your best decisions didn't just get handed to you with an open door or kept from you with a closed door. That's a ridiculous thing. If you believe that, David would be saying, this is my open door. I'm going to slit his throat and I'm going to become king. It is my day. It has been promised to me. Every one of our lives has some really pivotal points, pivotal times, and those pivotal times we don't know in real time when they're happening. But here's the reality in your life, wherever you're sitting today, if you look back, you have had some pivotal times and they have determined your outcomes. You will have some pivotal times. If you're not in it right now, it won't be long. The problem is you often don't know. You don't know how pivotal they are till you look back. You have to assume every day that if God gave you breath, it is an important day, because this day determines your outcomes. Well, for David, this was a pivotal day for him. You can see why. It was a big deal. The next verse says that David crept up unnoticed. So Saul is hanging out over there, we could say. And David is coming up from the dark, and this is the original meaning of the word creeping up on somebody. And as he does, I just want you to notice that something happened between his initial thought of this is an opportunity and when he reached Saul, something happened inside of him. The reason I know something happened inside of him is some things began to change. We go from David crept up unnoticed, and then when we finish that thought, it says, and he cut off the corner of Saul's robe. That is not the way the story was. When he started the creep, not Saul, but David, when he started to creep up, it was the intention, obviously, based on what the guy said, that he was going to kill him. But somewhere between when he started with the initial thought and his final action, something changed. If you read the verses to follow, what you realize is David actually had this thing where he said, the Bible says he was conscience stricken. There was something that went inside of David that said, this is not right. This is not the answer. This is not what I need to do. I just want to stop for a second and say this. In everything that goes on in your life, if you're a follower of Jesus, there will be something that triggers in you that says, hang on. I don't know what to call it. Maybe it's a moment of consciousness. Maybe it is the Spirit that prompts something in you. Maybe it is just that moment of clarity. I don't know what you call it. Some people would say it's a check in your spirit. I don't know. You choose the words. I'm just saying it will happen. It happens in all of us. If you're a follower of Jesus, because His Spirit is within us, He does not leave you alone. And in moments like this, when decisions are being made, it is how we move past from the initial thought to the final action. We have to deal with that. What most of us do is we negotiate it away, or we reason it away, or we discuss it away, or we explain it away, and then we butt right past it. But something happened with David, and he did not follow through with his initial thought because something checked in his spirit. When he gets back, we begin to understand what was going on in his mind. The men obviously wanted to know, what the heck? This was your chance. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay a hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. And with these words, David sharply rebuked the men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And then Saul left the cave and went his way. The men had to be going, what? 2 minutes ago, you hated this guy. He wasn't the Lord's anointed. He was this horrible human being that put a bounty on your head. He was this horrible murdering king that was after you, the reason you're hiding in caves. What happened? And he rebukes them, and they've got to be saying, rebuke me, it was you. We're following you. But something happened between the first thought and the final action, and that changed everything. Do you think he knew what was hanging in the balance? Do you think he knew what was going to be dependent or the outcome of that moment? There's no way he could have known, but I will say this, he listened to what was going on inside, and when he did, it changed everything. So here's what we know, that he goes back to talk to the guys, that Saul goes out of the cave, he saddles up his beast or whatever, gets on and starts to go away. And then the next thing we know, we find David standing at the mouth of the cave, and now Saul hears a very familiar voice from a guy who sat around his table that married his daughter, that guy. And he says to the king, Saul, and he's holding up the part of his robe. Listen to his words in verse 12. He gives a little speech, and I'll just give you the synopsis of it here. He says, may the Lord judge between you and me, Saul. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. And then there's this amazing phrase, and it's where I want us to land today. But my hand will not touch you. He says, listen, see this? And Saul sees this, and automatically Saul goes, oh my goodness. He was that close. He could have. David says, listen, I will not avenge. I'll let God be the judge. I'm putting this in God's hands, but that's not the key part. What he said is, I'm not going to take this into my hands. That God has promised me the life that I am set out to have, but I'm not going to get there by taking this into my hands. What a pivotal moment in David's life. Saul's response was, what else can he do at this point? And he actually said, I recognize that you're a better man than me. I recognize what you've done, and I honor that. In the end, God exalted David to everything he had promised. But what David got in this moment was the ability to tell a story that he could have never told any other way. What David got in that moment was the ability to someday have his grandkids come up to him and say, Grandpa David, tell me the story about how you became king. Tell me the story about how God did this in your life. What he lost was the story of the grandkids coming up saying, Grandpa David, tell us the story again about how the mean King Saul was taking a toozy and you slit his throat. Tell us the story how you murdered Israel's first king. Tell us the story again, Grandpa, because that's what was hanging in the balance. What he allowed was his life to reflect what God had done, not how he manipulated his way to the place that God had promised him. In every one of our lives, we have pivotal moments, and those pivotal moments we don't know are pivotal till later. And in every one of those opportunities, it may be a conversation, it may be an action, it may be whatever it is for you, we have a shortcut that we can take to get to our destination, or we'll also find that there's a little something inside of us that says, hang on, don't go there or do that. And often what we do is negotiate our way around those things. You know what happens when we negotiate with God? We reduce God to our size. We take him off of his God place and we bring him down and make him one of us. And a God that's more like me than he is like God is of no value to anybody. We do that all the time. I do that. I'll often explain to God why he ought to do what he said he would do the way I want him to do it. And when I do, he no longer is God for me. He's just another person for me to explain my wants and my desires to. I know that all sounds kind of far-fetched, but here's the truth. You do that sometimes. I do that sometimes. When I'm frustrated or I'm hopeful and it's not coming to fruition, I will tell God. I'll talk to God a lot and I'll say, God, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And here's what I think you should do. When I negotiate with God, I bring him down to our size. Here's the other thing. I negotiate far more with me than I do with God. I talk myself into or out of. I explain. Sometimes we call it justifying. When I negotiate with myself, it reduces me to the size of the very people I never want to be. Here's the truth of it. There's some of us who are watching this today who are in spots in life where we've been hurt or we've been wronged, we've been injured in some way, and everything that happens, it triggers us into something else. And the way we explain our reaction, even if it's inappropriate, is we look back at what that person has done, and you would understand if you knew what I've been through. And the reason I act that way is because that's how I was treated. And when we do, this is the sad part, we actually become a little bit more like the person who hurt us or injured us, or the person we said we'd never be. For some of us, that's our moms or dads. We were hurt deeply in our lives. For some of us, that's your ex-husband or your ex-wife, or it's a sibling. Or for some of us, that's the person you've worked for. For some of us, you fill in the blank who it is, but most of us have a somebody. And every time we explain our misactions, we become a little bit more like the person we said we'd never become. As we negotiate our way through, we always lose. So here's the answer to that. And I'm just telling you, it won't be long, if not now, before you're in a spot. And this one little phrase, one little sentence, I guess, I think would help us so much. It is the one I try to run through my mind over and over, and sometimes I do it well. And if I were to be completely honest, sometimes I don't do it well at all. But here it is, I'll throw it out to you. I will pause and explore rather than ignore what's going on inside of me. When I have this initial thought and I go, well, that's what I'm going to do, but there's something inside of me, and boy, it's hard to hear because it's usually not screaming. It's usually a small, still voice that says, just wait. Don't say that. Don't do that. Don't go there. Don't get in the middle of that. It's just that moment. And usually what I try to do is I try to go, well, yeah, but you don't understand, and then I just move past. But man, when I'm living in a healthy way, what I do is I will pause and explore rather than ignore what's going on inside of me. It's a game changer. Somewhere between David seeing an opportunity and following through, he paused and explored what was going on inside of him. And his outcome was this: I will not take this situation into my own hands. I will trust somebody for an outcome. But I choose to trust God instead of trust myself. I will pause. Wherever you're sitting, you may be sitting, staring at your phone, sitting on your sofa, or you may be sitting on your back patio or at a picnic table or wherever you are. Some of you are driving down the road, coming back from vacation, whatever it is for you. Would you do this? I know this is weird, but what else is new? Weird's not all bad. Would you say these words? I will pause and explore. Say that with me. I will pause and explore rather than ignore what's going on inside of me. I promise you this, if you will choose that every time you feel that little check in your spirit, that little small voice, that little thing going on inside of you, if you will pause and explore that time between the initial thought and your final action, it will change your outcomes. I bet you can look back in your life and find some times. Matter of fact, we're going to look at it next week, really specific times. I bet you can see times where you've done that and you're thrilled. And I bet you can find times that you haven't and you're sad. If you look at David's life, I can show you some of both. Because the Bible is so explicit about his successes like this one and his failures in other ways. He had the same check in his spirit, the same voice inside of his head, the same nudging from God. And sometimes he talked his way through it. And sometimes he listened to it. And it changed his outcomes. I'll tell you the problem with this whole deal. For many of us, our relationship with God is kind of Sunday morning Jesus. It's like I'll turn on my screen and I'll listen to something for a little while. Or for some of you, now that we're back in the opened up church world, you go, well, I'm going to set aside my hour a week, and you've got your Sunday morning Jesus on. And that's kind of your relationship with God. You go get your fix, you listen, it kind of gets you through. Nobody can speak badly of you. And it's not that you don't care, but it's like it's just another thing in a busy schedule. Sunday morning Jesus is not enough to be heard in the heat of the moment. You will have to develop a relationship with God where you can sense and hear His voice. It's not an out loud voice, that's the problem. That everything else in our mind is exploding and is loud, and that God will keep His soft where you have to listen for Him. He will not beat down the door. He will not scream at you. He typically allows you to make your own mistakes because He gives us a free will. But I will just tell you this, if you will pause and explore instead of ignore what's going on in your heart, it will change our outcomes. It'll lessen our regrets when we look back and go, I wish I hadn't. It'll so reduce those. There'll be stories that'll be told that you don't even know are going to be stories where someday in your world somebody will come up and say, tell me the story. And instead of saying, I wish I had never, or here's a story to learn from because this was the wrong way, you'll be able to say, listen, I didn't do any of it. I didn't take it into my own hands. I allowed God to make the difference. I sit with people all the time who are couples who are going through struggles, or people who have their lives, and they'll come and say to me as a pastor, hey, this is what's going on. And when I listen to them, about 4 or 5 years ago, I sat with a couple, and the wife told me that I had this work relationship, and it kind of got out of hand, and I never really intended. But I ended up doing things, and I've hurt my husband, and I've hurt my children, I've hurt myself. I'm so sad by that. And as we were talking, I just asked the question because I'm curious, not trying to take a shot. I was just like, at any point in the middle of that, did you sense that I'm going a bad direction? And she said, 30 times. Something inside said, don't do that. But you know what I told myself? My husband hasn't been a very good husband, and if he were better to me, if he were more attentive to my needs, and if he could be more like this person who cares about me so much that he would cheat on me, cheat on my husband with me. He's such a high quality human. But I ran past every one of those little roadblocks. I took every one of those shortcuts. Did you ever feel? Yes, I felt that. Over and over. But I just explained it away. I negotiated, even with God. I kept saying, I know God doesn't want me to feel this empty, this lonely, this sadness. I even justified it with God. And you know what she was? She was just a normal human being who's breathing. We all have that capacity. Her story is easy to tell. We've all got stories that are like that. Can I just give you some examples? And that's kind of how we'll close things up for our day. And I've got a list. None of these may land on you, but it'll give you an idea. It's the person who says, I'm just going to make the purchase. You know why? Because I can afford to. But there's something inside that goes, don't do that. Hold on. Think this through. And because I want it and I've talked myself into it, I negotiate past that. I may negotiate with a spouse. I may negotiate with myself. I may negotiate with God. And can I just give you this thing? Just because it's a great deal and just because you can afford it doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. Often, you know what it means? Is that I put myself in a financial situation where I have no choices. I've made a commitment to that. Now, even if I feel like I should have a different job so I can care better for my family, or even if it means this is an unhealthy place, I'm stuck there. Or even if it means we've both got to work every day till we die because I've taken this on, can I just say, in our debt, in our spending and those things, there will be times when you feel something inside that says, hang on, and it is so easy to go, hey, compared to other people, I'm doing pretty well. And just saying it happens. Could I just encourage you, before you do it, when you feel that little check, would you pause and explore rather than ignore what's going on inside of you? It's real life stuff. Maybe it's this one. I know this relationship for all of our singles who are watching this wherever you are, or singles again. I know this relationship is unhealthy, but he's so hot, or she's so hot. Or maybe it's this, that I'm just so lonely. And I'll be honest, if I don't follow through with this one, there may not be another one. And I'm just tired of being alone. But somewhere deep inside, you feel that check. Can you just pause and explore maybe what God is saying? Rather than ignore, it'll change your outcomes. Maybe it's this, I'm not lying, I'm just not telling the entire truth. I didn't lie to him. I didn't lie to her. I didn't cheat on that. I just didn't tell the whole truth. and you feel that little thing inside, that little conviction, that little twang, pause and explore. For many of you who are business people, it's this: hey dude, this isn't church. It's business. I have to do what I have to do. I know it's not integrity, but every time you fill out that expense sheet, every time you stretch the truth to your customer, every time you take a shortcut and your integrity is left behind, you feel that little pang inside. And you talk yourself through it because that's just the way business is, and that's how I make a living. I'm just providing for my family. Can I just say this to you? You don't know what God could do if you don't. When you put it in your own hands, you take it out of God's hands. Just don't buy into that. It's business. That's just what I do. Here's another one for you. It's not a life. It's just tissue, and it could ruin my whole life. I can't follow through with this. It was just an accident. And you know what? It's just the normal thing to do in our world today. Can I just say this before you act? When you feel that little still small voice inside of you, could I say, would you pause and explore what God's doing inside of you? But if I don't, you know how this will affect. Can I just say, when you take it out of God's hands into your own hands, it's all the weight on your shoulders. Don't underestimate what God could do in your life. Well, if she hadn't started it, if he hadn't started it, I would pause and explore. We're just friends. There's nothing going on. You sound like my wife right now. You sound like my husband right now. There's nothing going on. But every time you're there, you feel that little side of conviction. Can I just say, please? Please, for the sake of the stories that follow, would you pause and explore rather than ignore? You just don't know what hangs in the balance. A couple more and we'll stop. Maybe for you it would be like this: compared to what other people are doing, I'm doing just fine. This is nothing. Maybe it's this: I'm just watching it. I don't do anything. It doesn't affect me at all. But when you're involved, you sense this emptiness. You sense this voice that says something else. Could I, for God's sake, would you just stop, pause, and explore what's going on inside of you? What are you running from when you're running toward that? And what you're running from is God and His ability to bring the wholeness you're looking for in life. I can stop any time I want. And often when you're not stopping, you feel that same thing. Could I just say, don't underestimate what God can do in your life. The stories that will be told tomorrow are the decisions you make today. And the decisions you make today, there will be a point from the first thought to the final action. And in that time, if you're a follower of Jesus, you will find that He will speak into your life. He will nudge you. He will prompt you. He will somehow make Himself known. And most of us blow right past it. Would you please, hey, just pause and ignore. Pause and explore rather than ignore. If you're watching this right now and some of those things are coming into your mind and you just say, I don't even know what you're talking about, Chris. I don't feel like there's a God within me. May I suggest to you, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see where it says raise a hand. And it is just an opportunity for you to invite Jesus into your life. It's just the ability to humble yourself to the point of saying, you take control. I've negotiated my way into my messes. I need help. And if you'll forgive me, I will follow you. And maybe that's you right now, just to say those words to God. And if you do, just click on that. Maybe you're going through some pretty heavy stuff right now and you feel very alone in it. If you just click that live prayer button, there's somebody just waiting. That they can't fix your problems, but man, wouldn't it feel good to know there's somebody going through it with you? If you'll just click there, there'll be a friend on the other end who will just sit with you in a private chat moment, just pray with you, and they'll remember you in their prayers all week long. You know why? Because we weren't intended to do life alone. So would you do this week? Please, whenever you feel that prompt, would you just pause and explore rather than ignore what's going on inside of you? And the story you tell down the road will be one that will make you proud, that will make your family proud, that will build God's kingdom, and it'll make you the person you were created to be. So God, help us Help us not blow past those little moments that keeps us away from the moments that matter so much. For those who do this week, we will praise you. For those who struggle, would you offer us hope tomorrow? We ask it in your name. Amen.